Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Paras.
And joining us is a first-time guest, Ryan McQuade. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Ryan.
It's an honor to be here, guys. Long-time listener of the show. I've been around since the Genesis, it feels like. Really excited to participate today. And, participate in some of the inside jokes you guys have going on and some of the callbacks, and I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic.
Well, lovely to have you. We appreciate the support. We do try to do callbacks, but we're actually getting to the point now where we've recorded so many of these episodes where we're really starting to forget things.
But I guess since you've been listening since the beginning, Ryan, do you have a favorite episode?
Ooh, I cleared my schedule for the Phantom Menace. That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to sit and listen through. And I remember watching that one, listening to that one with my wife, and we were just kind of like, we were equally participating vocally, even though you guys obviously couldn't hear us in the recording. But like, we were acting like we were there, just like shouting stuff at the speakers, and it was very emotionally stirring. I'm excited for The Force Unleashed because that's one I actually saw in the theaters with Patrick, and we felt the same walking out of that movie.
Gross disappointment.
Yeah, one of us liked it, but we don't need to talk about that right now. Not one of us, one of our group, but someone enjoyed it, and we judged them immediately.
Yeah, I somewhat lost respect for the person after that. They were telling me how cool the characters were. I was like, ugh.
It was an eye opener.
Well, we'll certainly talk about that on the recording we're not planning on doing the sequel trilogy for a long time from now, because as you know, I've never even seen the last two, and I know Anton has no interest in rewatching them anytime soon.
Yeah, it'll take a minute, but
we'll put that card back in the deck for a little bit.
Yeah. But no, I mean, Phantom Menace is I feel like Phantom Menace is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. It's like I had to get my opinion in on it too. Now there are two of them. Yeah, so today it's back to Disney, and we're talking about a traditionally animated Disney film from the Disney Renaissance. Anton, this is a first for us. This is the first of the Disney Renaissance films that we are going to cover.
Yeah, and that's super exciting just because for hardcore Disney fans and film buffs, you think Disney Renaissance, weren't those all just fantastic films?
Absolutely. They were all stunning and brave.
I think we're going to get to the discussion a little bit later, but if you look at the totality of the Renaissance, you could really break it down into two parts. There's the first half, which I think most people would agree is the stronger of the two halves, and then you have the second half, which is, I want to say, it's more uneven than people remember. But just my opinion.
Which film do you consider the turning point?
Pocahontas.
Oh, that's fair.
Which came out the year before this.
I guess that's consistent with them branching into more non-fiction themes.
Yeah, I mean,
I think they were doing Lion King.
That. Yeah, they tried to pass
Lion
that
King
off
at the same time as this film, I thought. Like when they were working on Hunchback.
Yeah, the production of those films certainly overlapped. Pocahontas came out the year before this, and then the year after this was Hercules.
Their legacies certainly don't overlap.
No, which we'll get to. And just a reminder, the second half of the Renaissance was Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, which we're talking about today, Hercules, Mulan, and then Tarzan.
I think that's a very fair assessment. I've seen that similar list online before.
But
I agree.
Hunchback of Notre Dame, or Dom, however, depends on where you live, I guess. That's what we're here to discuss today. And without further ado, I will intro this for us. An animated Disney adventure that follows the disfigured Quasimodo, the bell ringer of Notre Dame Cathedral, who bides his time locked away in a tower, with only gargoyles to keep him company. Quasimodo longs to be with other people, leading to his chance encounter with the enchanting gypsy Esmeralda, when the beautiful young woman catches the attention of Quasimodo's guardian, the sinister Judge Frollo. Quasimodo must help to keep her out of his clutches. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was released on June 21st, 1996 by Walt Disney Pictures. It was directed by Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise. The screenplay was written by Tab Murphy, Irene Mecci, Bob Tzoukier, Nani White and Jonathan Roberts, voiced by Tom Hulse, Demi Moore, Tony Jay, Kevin Kline, Paul Candell, Jason Alexander, Charles Kimbrough, Mary Wicks, and David Ogden Stiers. The budget was anywhere from $70 to $100 million. That is 139 to $200 million adjusted for inflation. Very expensive film. The box office was $325 million. That is $646 million adjusted for inflation. Ryan, as today's guest, why did you want to talk about The Hunchback of Notre Dame?
Anything to get on the podcast. No, I'm kidding. I felt I feel like I felt as connected to this movie as, any of us millennials growing up in the late 90s. When did this movie come out? 99?
This one came in 96.
96. Okay, I'm ahead of myself then. So, I mean, we were all part of the target demographic for this film, and it was, as we were discussing, somewhat of an experimental phase for Disney. They're trying out like Phil Collins, Tarzan, and more nonfiction settings. I felt like, all of the weird Burger King toys and the commercials and, the previews that were pretty much like 80% like the 4 comedic relief moments in the movie were all directed at us to, get us in the theater. And then, I equally felt like you guys to my understanding that there's just all these adult themes and overtones that completely went over our heads. But as adults, as rewatchers, we find all of these themes and tones much more relatable and enjoyable. I'd also say that this is, if I had to pick up, not that I have the whole top 5 worked out, but I'd say this is one of my top 5 favorite original soundtracks from any movie. It's excellent.
Great reasons. Last season, Anton, we covered Atlantis: The Lost Empire. That was our first animated Disney film. That was a listener request. They pointed out that we've been neglecting these types of films, right?
Yep.
Not just Disney films, but the real animated Disney films. We had so much fun covering that we decided every season we would try to cover at least one of these. And when I asked Ryan if there was any film that he was interested in doing, I sent him a list, and he chose this. I think it's an inspired choice on your part, Ryan. This shares a connection to Atlantis. This was directed by the 2 gentlemen who not only did Beauty and the Beast and this and Atlantis as well. So they had been, veterans of the Disney animation studios. This is an interesting film for a lot of different reasons. We mentioned it was released during the Disney Renaissance. It made a good profit, but not nearly as much as something like The Lion King, right? And also, curiously, Anton, would you agree, this does not have the same cultural impact as some of its predecessors? I'm talking about The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
But like any Disney fan from that era, it, of course, has plenty of fans.
When I think people think about who is on the Mount Rushmore of great Disney films from that time period, a lot of people don't put this film on that Mount Rushmore. But we will talk more about that.
I don't think I had seen this since I saw it in the theater in 1996. That's how old I am. And this really does make me feel old. If I saw it since then, it would have been in the VHS era. So it had been a long time. I remembered very little about it other than I remembered, Ryan, to your point, the soundtrack was amazing, but I couldn't remember specific songs from it. And it just, for whatever reason, even though I was certainly part of the target demographic, I would have been 8 years old when this came out. It did not resonate with me nearly as much as The Lion King and Aladdin had. I can't really figure out why necessarily. I think we're going to try to dig into that a little bit. But I just didn't have a lot of time for this one. So, yeah, you're right, Ryan. Watching this now as an adult, totally like seeing it in a different light.
Well, there's just all of these themes that were pushed on us as children that, we weren't able to relate to yet. You're talking about like pseudo-racism and lust and, all of these strong Catholic overtones, the threat of hellfire. These were things we were just beginning to pick up on at best.
And we're going to discuss this more later in this episode, but I think all of us could agree Disney would never make this film now. Would never happen.
Absolutely not.
Well, I thought they were going to include those themes in Frozen 2, but I was wrong. So
if they ever do the live action remake of this, which has been rumored for a few years, I really am curious if they're gonna.
They better go hard. That's all I'm saying.
I hope they don't, because I don't think any of us are really fans of the live action remakes. But
If there was ever a
we'll
chance for
see.
them to maybe redeem themselves,
They
it's by
did a couple. Wasn't like Selma Hayek, Esmeralda recently following the animated release or something? Like there was a couple. Like there were some that are more book based, obviously, and I mean that's its own discussion. Can't wait to talk about the origins of this story and alterations made. But like, yeah, there was like a bunch of live actions, like seemingly crappy ones.
There have been, but I think we're speaking more to the Disney's trend of just rehashing classic films, but with either live or CGI.
They're not going to do what they did with Lion King right now in 2024. I don't think so.
They might, because that made $1 billion.
Yeah, it's an
Do
easy
you think they'll
template.
apply that formula to Hunchback?
I hope not, and I don't know. Well, we'll get to it. Because this has
So
been
excited.
a rumor, but then it's supposed to be in limbo, and it's not really clear where the status of this remake is. But let's delve into the production history of this.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this is based on the novel written by Victor Hugo, but the origins for this specific adaptation go back to 1993, when a Disney executive by the name of David Stainton, he was inspired to turn Victor Hugo's novel into an animated feature film after reading the classics illustrated comic book adaptation. Anton, are you familiar with this?
I am not, actually.
Are you interested in this now that you know that there is one?
I mean, slightly. I've read Victor Hugo's novel, the original novel. I could only guess as to how well the comic adaptation is.
Well, you let me know.
Okay.
Stainton proposed the idea to then studio chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg, a gentleman we should all be familiar with. Katzenberg greenlit the project. At the time, the studio was in the midst of making The Lion King. And as we all know from our Ants episode, Katzenberg left the studio under acrimonious circumstances in 1994. So this would have been one of, if not the last project that he was responsible for greenlighting. Now, Gary Truesdale, who had co-directed Beauty and the Beast, he was in the middle of a sabbatical. The last thing he had done for the studio was contributed to storyboard ideas on The Lion King. Following this, he and his directing and writing partner, Kirk Wise, they developed an animated feature idea based on the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, titled A Song of the Sea, adapting it to make the central character a humpback whale and setting it in the open ocean. And while this project never officially got off the ground, for all you Disney fans out there, if you know your Disney, the idea for this story made it into Fantasia 2000 as a short.
Eurydice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eurydice, whatever. I'm sorry, I could sit here all night and butcher names for you. While they were working on this, Katzenberg summoned them to his office and told them, quote, "Guys, drop everything. You're working on Hunchback now," end quote. Now, according to Wise, they believed that the project had a great deal of potential, quote, "great memorable characters, a really terrific setting, the potential for fantastic visuals, and a lot of emotion," end quote. So production on The Hunchback of Notre Dame began in the summer of 1993. In October of that year, the filmmakers and members of their team, including composer Alan Menken and lyricist Stephen Schwartz, they took a 10-day trip to Paris. 3 days were devoted to exploring the Notre Dame Cathedral, including a private tour of rarely glimpsed sites such as passageways, stairwells, towers, and a hidden room. The production crew also visited the Palace of Justice and an original location of where the Court of Miracles was. Tab Murphy was hired to write the screenplay. Anton, he also worked on Atlantis. Quasimodo was to be the center of the story, as he was in preceding live-action film adaptations. In the early drafts, Quasimodo served as a Cyrano between Phoebus and Esmeralda, but it was discarded to focus more on his character. A love story between Quasimodo and Esmeralda was also conceived, according to Murphy, but, quote, "we decided to make Phoebus more heroic and central to the story. Out of that decision grew the idea of some sort of triangle between Quasimodo, Esmeralda, and Phoebus," end quote. The gargoyles of Notre Dame were added to the story by Truesdale and Wise. Their portrayal as comedic friends and confidants of Quasimodo was an inspiration from the novel itself, which reads, quote, "the other statues, the ones of monsters and demons, felt no hatred for Quasimodo. The saints were his friends and blessed him. The monsters were his friends and protected him. Thus he would pour his heart at length to them. Thus he would pour out his heart at length to them. End quote.
That's wholesome. Tearing up a little bit.
The first major change was Disney's request to turn the villainous Claude Frollo into a judge rather than an archdeacon, thus avoiding religious sensibilities in the finished film. Producer Don Hahn evaluated that one inspiration for Frollo was found in Ray Fiennes' performance as Amon Goth in Schindler's List, who had murdered Jews yet lusted after his Jewish maid. It was Stephen Schwartz who suggested that the opening sequence to be musicalized. Stephen Schwartz, of course, Wicked for all you Broadway fans. Schwartz also worked closely with the writing team, even suggesting that the audience should be left wondering what the outcome of what Phoebus would do before he extinguishes the torch in water in retaliation against Frollo. Quasimodo and Esmeralda were both spared their fates and given a happy ending. This revised ending was based in part on Victor Hugo's own libretto to A Hunchback opera, in which he had permitted Captain Phoebus to save Esmeralda from her execution. The development team had come up with the name of Chaney, Lawton, and Quinn, named after the actors who portrayed Quasimodo in preceding Hunchback film adaptations. However, Disney's legal department objected to the proposed names of the gargoyles, fearing that the estates of Lon Chaney, Charles Lawton, and Anthony Quinn, who was still alive at the time, would file a lawsuit over the unauthorized use of their names, so the idea was dropped. In late 1993, pop singer Cyndi Lauper was the first actor cast during the film's initial stages. Thinking she had been cast as Esmeralda, Lauper was startled to learn she was to voice a gargoyle named Quinn. She was later politely fired. Now, Jeffrey Katzenberg had considered Arsenio Hall, David Letterman, and Jay Leno to voice the gargoyles, but he eventually cast Jason Alexander due to his previous role in The Return of Jafar. It is said that behind closed doors, Jeffrey Katzenberg allowed Alexander onto the cast after showing him feats of strength that may have been embellished.
Did they air grievances?
Well, 'twas the holiday. Now, Katzenberg had wanted Meatloaf for the role of Quasimodo, but he passed on the role after Disney could not come to an agreement with his record company. Mandy Patinkin, who also approached for the title role, but his style of portraying Quasimodo collided with the producer's demands. The audition went badly. To this day, it is known at Disney as the Patinkin incident. According to directors Gary Truesdale and Kirk Wise, Patinkin brought along his own arranger to do a new arrangement of the song, Out There. This greatly angered composer Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, who walked out of the audition. Tom Hulse was cast as Quasimodo following his audition for the role. Quasimodo was originally portrayed as older and with more of a speech impediment during the early rehearsals, but Hulse commented that, quote, "We experimented endlessly. At one point, I was ready to call in and say, things just aren't happening." Ultimately, the directors decided to portray Quasimodo with a younger voice different from the previous portrayals since, quote, Victor Hugo described Quasimodo as 20. Now, Hulse was permitted to do his own singing after performing a demo recording of Out There. Demi Moore was cast as Esmeralda without having to audition and met with Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz on singing. After several singing demos, the actor said, "No, you better get someone else," end quote. And according to Schwartz, New York City cabaret singer Heidi Mollenhauer was selected to provide the singing voice. Kevin Kline was offered the role of Phoebus without having to audition. British actor Tony Jay, who declared his role as Frollo as his bid for immortality, was cast after the directors had worked with him in Beauty and the Beast. Anthony Hopkins was originally considered for the role, but he turned down the offer. As production commenced, most animators were occupied with The Lion King and Pocahontas at the time, and as a result, more animators were hired from Canada and the United Kingdom to join the production team for the film. During early development, Truesdale and Wise realized they needed crowds of people, but for this time, they wanted them to move as opposed to being traditionally drawn as painted backdrops, and decided to use CG. For that reason, the CGI department, headed by Kiran Joshi, created the software Crowd to achieve large-scale crowd scenes, particularly for the Feast of Fools sequence and the film's climax. Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz were offered multiple projects and chose this one. 3 songs written for the film were discarded for the storyboarding processes. Truesdale and Wise were not certain what musical number could be placed for the third act, though Menken and Schwartz conceived 2 love songs, In a Place of Miracles and As Long as There's a Moon. between Esmeralda and Phoebus in the film. However, Truesdale and Wise felt the song took too much focus off Quasimodo and ultimately decided to have Clopin sing about sentencing Phoebus and Quasimodo to death for finding their Roma sanctuary. It was the first and currently only Disney animated feature to have a major focus on traditional religious faith, in this case, pre-Reformation Catholicism. In fact, the words God, Lord, and Hell are uttered more times in this film than in any other produced by Disney. With a reported budget of up to $100 million, this was tied with Eraser for the most expensive film of 1996. And for some context, this film cost more to make than Independence Day, Twister, Mission Impossible, and The Rock. The film has a 71% Rotten Tomato score, and this ended up doing very well financially. It was the 5th highest grossing film of 1996. Shall we take any guesses for what the top 4 were?
I know what they are. Ryan, if you want to take a gander at this. This is very easy.
All right, so this is like right. Well, this isn't the area I did my homework in, but
Well, I mean, he just said a bunch of them.
This would be right before it did better then, or the ones that succeeded against it.
No, this was the 5th highest grossing film of 1996. Do you want to guess what the top 4 were?
I also just said
one of them isn't Toy Story, is it?
No, I mean, he literally just said them, Ryan.
Sorry, I was yelling at my dogs.
So Independence Day was number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Twister was number 2. Mission Impossible was number 3, and The Rock was number 4.
Oh, well then, I'm sorry I missed the softball.
We hoped you would get it, but
it wasn't.
No, I did. I put my homework in other areas. I'm very excited to talk about.
Yeah, well, there's a lot behind this production history. We'll go more into it. Why don't we go ahead and dive into why this film wasn't better? But before we do, a word from our sponsor.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. And we're back. First reason why this wasn't better, this is not your typical children's movie. Watching this the other day, I was kind of amazed about all the adult stuff that is in this movie. This is like watching a R-rated G movie. Ooh. If that makes any sense.
I know exactly what you're saying. It's very... It flirts with these... This could also be a film just made for adults, but it doesn't quite go into that far of a territory. But these are definitely adult themes.
It's hovering over late night television for sure. It's edging.
I think it works fine as a children's movie, but there's a lot of stuff in here that I just don't think kids are into, and I think it partly explains why I wasn't into it as much as a kid. Now, obviously, my experience with this film in 1996 was different than yours. You had a love for it back then that I didn't. But I think this does explain part of it. Like watching this now as an adult, I appreciated this far, far more than I did as a kid.
I think it failed as a children's movie personally. And I felt that way then. And looking back, I feel that even more now. You know, like whatever campaigning they did with the Burger King toys and etc. Like whatever they were trying to get kids to ask their parents to buy didn't happen. It didn't seem like they were able to franchise it the way other things of that era were succeeding. I like me walking out of that, you know, I didn't ask my parents for a Quasimodo doll. I just climbed a bunch of stuff. Started climbing things like Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, this was a film that probably wasn't for the masses of kids. Now, if we do take a subsection of like hardcore Disney fans, this film is a film that will resonated when they were children. This was also for me a film that I enjoyed as a kid, but I can only say I really appreciate it for what it is, even more so as an adult.
Did the French enjoy it?
The French score well critically in France, based on Wikipedia. I mean, obviously, take that with a grain of salt, but
fun fact:
apparently it did.
The production.
I'm glad.
The production team were able to actually stay at Disney's Paris office because they were also opening Disneyland Paris that same year. So they
like that just started off and it was like the first production where they worked on it in all 3 locations, right? It's like that in California. I forget the third, but I saw that when I was doing homework the other night on this, and it was the first one to utilize all their locations.
But it's interesting you said it failed as a children's movie, Ryan. Jason Alexander agrees with you. He said that, quote, Disney would have us believe this movie's like the Ringling Brothers for children of all ages, end quote. But he said he would not take his then 4-year-old child to view the film.
If you watch trailers for the film on YouTube, a lot of what's also in the trailers is like topsy-turvy, but we know that topsy-turvy is only one portion of the film.
That's the thing, right? Is not just viewing the trailers, but I was digging into where you were going with this, Ryan, like how they marketed this film. It would have been misleading. I know I don't remember this in '96, but
like the quotes used.
The marketing slogan for the film was "Join the party." This movie is anything but a party.
We get a death in the opening scene.
Yeah, like we get an orphaned child like 20 seconds into it, and he holds the baby over a well, prepared to not only the murder of the mother, but like us as children are watching as this newborn babe is held over a well, hovering above its demise.
He almost kills an infant. He lusts after the gypsy and then blames her for it. And then he very casually explains to this captain of the guard that he just hired, I want to commit genocide of the gypsies. I want to wipe them all out. So not your typical Disney fare.
Yeah. Bambi would say that a lot of these themes weren't in his film either.
I do think it's so fascinating that Disney was willing to actually do this at the time, though. We're saying this doesn't quite work as a children's movie, but this has nothing to do with the film's quality or lack thereof, right?
You could cut the gargoyles out, and I feel it would be an excellent film.
Oh, we'll get to the gargoyles. I have thoughts.
I actually personally really like the gargoyles, but I think one thing I do want to kind of point out is while we are pointing to a lot of the heavier themes of the film, something that's a bit more literally on the surface is themes around like acceptance and kind of inner beauty, which I think kids can probably connect to a lot closer. When, just talking to a few folks, this was one of the earlier themes that they remember from the movie as a kid, not so much all of these other heavier themes.
It was about how you treat people.
Yeah, and the important takeaway from this movie is that the ugly person does not get the girl.
The jock does.
Someone never saw the sequel.
I have never seen a sequel, and based on what I know, I will never.
Yeah, don't do it. There's a reason why.
The football captain gets the coach, and gets the girl.
You are right, Anton. It's not all doom and gloom. There are certainly some very positive takeaways from this film, and we're not trying to paint this film as some kind of dark nightmare, because at the end of the day, it is still a Disney film. Mm-hmm. And of course, the craziest part is they certainly changed things from the source material. It's one of the darkest, moodiest films in Disney's library, but they kind of had to, right? And it's not even, they didn't even take the worst parts of the novel.
Yeah, they really.
Are we spoiling the novel? Like, are we openly talking about it?
We can spoil the novel.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, so it's not like Disney was going to have Quasimodo like crawling out of Esmeralda's grave and die or whatever, however that ended up. Yeah, they just couldn't do that.
And frankly speaking, I don't want to see that in a Disney film. I don't know if I'd want to see that in any film.
It was so sad.
Not entertaining to me.
It was like Bambi times 100.
I think it's fair to say that trying to take very adult stories and then translate into a kid's film, it's not something that Disney hasn't done before. Even if
like Stockholm Syndrome.
I mean, if you take the story of Lion King, if that's the story, if that's a Shakespearean tale of, the uncle killing his brother, Simba's father, openly in front of him and banishing him, I think like that's still a pretty mature thematic element to occur, but at the same time, like, had to translate it for kids.
Yeah, for anyone who wants to criticize this for not being more faithful to Hugo's novel, I tell them just get over it. Disney took this as far as they could for a kid's movie. Remember, this is G-rated. This is as far as you can possibly take something that's rated G.
There was enough emotional scarring. There's plenty.
And look, for what it's worth, I read the original novel a long time ago. I think it's faithful to what Hugo wrote in terms of the atmosphere that it's created. I think the core of that story is still there in this film.
Yeah, and we talked about it in the production, but Hugo probably would have been okay with changing these elements. He did it on a rewrite for a stage adaptation. So
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
the original just felt very senseless. It was just kind of like, well, why is this happening? You know, the perceived death of the captain, and then Esmeralda gets blamed for it, and then like he wakes up, and they was literally described like Frollo dresses like a goblin and starts stabbing people. It was a little wild.
Short on comedy, long on drama. That's how I would describe this film. That's why it didn't fly with a lot of kids. Now, of course, there were plenty of kids that did like it. Tom Hulce was the right choice for Quasimodo.
Amadeus.
Yeah. Pinto.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't Meatloaf.
Yeah, reading that's wild. Like I'm not familiar with a lot of his voice work. I mean, obviously he's singing, but it's like I don't
There's the one song.
That he would do
see
anything
how that
for
works
love.
here. Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, we all.
I think it would have come off more like that process would have resulted in something that sounded a little more like Tarzan versus like, I don't know, if he was allowed to influence it.
There's a real sensitivity to Tom Hulce's voice that really, really works for the character.
Yeah, and it sells 20 years old.
Right. I think he did a good job with the singing too. You know, he's not traditionally, known as a singer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tom Hulce, he hasn't been in a ton of films. He's done a bunch of stage work though.
Yeah, and productions of this story actually, where then as well, I think Captain Thebes, if I'm saying it right, was allowed to get the girl. But it was some Phoebus. Yeah, Phoebus was allowed to get the girl, and that was something that he had influenced, as a plot deviation.
I like how Phoebus acknowledges that his name's not that cool. Tells us
I like how
it's better than my name.
I love the Achilles pun at the beginning of the movie,
yeah.
where like he's got a horse, he's like Achilles heel.
Yeah. There's stuff like that in the film, all over the film, that I think works, right? It's like when I said it's short on comedy, there is comedy in this film. It's not as flagrant as previous Disney films.
Yeah, this isn't Robin Williams' Genie with 100 jokes a minute, but
Right.
See, and that's what they were really trying to, I don't know if replicate the word. That was the teat they were trying to extract more from, though, was Robin Williams is comedian and he crushed Genie and Aladdin. Like, that did really well. So that's, like, Jason Alexander was nowhere near the first person considered for that role. And honestly, like, even if you left the other two gargoyles, I think one of the voiced by Mary Wilkes, I forget the other, but even if you left the other two, I would have just enjoyed omitting Jason Alexander. He devalued the gargoyles in my eyes.
It does. I agree with you. It doesn't work. It's like, oh, we'll get Costanza in here.
Yeah, they're meant to be like his stages, and I understand that like a need for a little bit of comedic relief, but it's supposed to be more like a Dante Virgil relationship, like navigating his isolation, navigating his desire to get out there and see the world. No pun intended.
Esmeralda, what we think?
I thought she was a pretty great character. A bit, I think,
Hottest Disney princess for sure.
Are we sure that's not Jasmine?
We're sure.
Okay, I don't know that we are, but okay.
I think I'm a bit more in the Jasmine camp personally.
Well, she's got a tiger. I mean, that's gonna turn you on.
It's got nothing to do with the tiger.
Nothing revs an engine like a tiger. Like, if there's anything Tiger King taught us, it's that revs the engine.
I would say Esmeralda as a character is probably the most sexually charged character in a Disney film that they could get away with.
Was it all the dancing? Did the dancing give it away?
And this is pretty funny. The MPAA actually insisted that the animators make her clothing more well-defined, as she seemed nude in the
especially in the Hellfire scene. Yeah.
Scene.
Look, I don't think it's a coincidence that Demi Moore was in Striptease the very same year as this.
She tried to sing her own songs, and then I guess after a minute she realized it would be better for the official record states she realized it would be better for the character to have an outside voice actress come in, or professional singer.
I think she did a great job altogether as in the role. She was also the highest paid voice actress at the time.
Wow.
$1 million for the role.
That's Interesting. I understand she was a bigger star at the time, but I thought it would have been Kevin Kline, who was an Academy Award winner by that point.
Well, so that's why I was saying voice actress. I don't know if
Oh, okay.
male voice
Did
actor.
Kevin Kline do Frollo?
No, he did
No.
Phoebus.
He had
Oh,
Phoebus.
Phoebus, sorry.
Yeah.
Who was the voice actor for Frollo again?
Tony J.
Mr. Tony J.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apparently, like, his outlook on this film and participating in it as Frollo, like, was that this was his shot and one of his last shots at immortalizing himself, like getting into something that would be talked about decades later. And here we are. I thought that was a cool little piece of trivia.
Fair to say, he definitely did it. I think that this is one of the most outstanding voice
Yeah.
performances and villains in all of Disney.
Top tier Disney villain for sure.
Absolutely.
I don't know why Kingdom Hearts never brought him in.
He is the monster of the story, obviously. Fascinating character, really. Again, especially just watching it as an adult, right? A lot of what's motivating him when you're 8 years old, you're just not going to pick up on. But now, he's not motivated by money. He's not motivated really by personal gain, like a Scar or Jafar type of character. Those are great villains too, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But
Envy.
I guess you could say he's motivated by power, but they say it in the beginning how he sees corruption in everything but himself. I know he's not a religious figure in the movie, but of course he is in the novel. And I think you can see that influence in here, even though he's technically just a judge. What is he, the Minister of Justice? Is that his position?
Yeah, he's a judge.
Some sort of judge.
And
yeah.
His character is ultimately hypocrisy.
Yes.
Yeah. But they establish very quickly that he has a fear for his soul. And that is what stayed his hand over that well.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the most complex Disney villains.
He's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But not many, if any, redeeming qualities. Like, it's very clear, like, oh yeah, this is a bad guy.
Yeah.
No.
He took the one good thing he did and what or was doing and turned it into like a Stockholm syndrome situation.
Oh, completely. He's gaslighting Quasimodo left and right.
Literally, like the songs in Out There, you're deformed, you're ugly, and he's just constantly just
I'm
banging
the
it
only
home.
one that can protect you.
You are my only protector. Yeah.
Remember, Quasimodo, this is your sanctuary. I did find his leadership qualities interesting. When he's like ordering all the soldiers around, like there's no charisma there at all. He's just ruling with an iron fist.
Yes.
And Phoebus sees right
very
through it.
imperial.
Yeah, Phoebe, in terms of like character arcs, I just actually love that there was more than one character that seemed to have a really full arc. Phoebus especially, along with Quasimodo. Because it could have been very easy to have Phoebus be like a very one-dimensional, like Disney prince type character, but he definitely...
I thought he was.
I felt like him having to overcome being part of the system and then actually being part of the rebellion of the system actually was...
I thought they were telegraphing it from the beginning because of the early interactions he had with Esmeralda and how he didn't identify himself to his subordinates in one of the first scenes of the movie, and then they're like, "Oh, Captain!" Like it seems like right off the bat he was already removed from that station to a degree, or at least as far as the way he perceived himself. Like walking, most captains would be walking through the streets, strutting, flashing badges, asking for free hot dogs.
I always just kind of thought of that more so we know that it's possible for him to go down that path. But again,
humble.
Versus having him on the outset be someone that's fighting against, like he wasn't actively fighting against the establishment.
I think he possesses the qualities of both, that humble guy setting himself for the arc, but also he also has like a bit of white knight syndrome. He just can't help himself to a degree. I feel like both of those things are at play with that character.
I think he's a good guy from the onset, but what's not clear is how big of a role is he going to play in the events of the story. And when he takes a very active role, especially at the scene at the windmill where he actively rebels against Frollo's what do you call it? Just tyrannical.
Oh yeah, he RSVP'd for the revolution at that
I think
point.
that's when you get the payoff with his character. You're like,
Right.
oh wow, he really is going to step up and do more than what you're
I
expecting.
never doubted that he would, though, and I mean that in a way where like it felt, for lack of a better term, telegraphed. Like they were displaying signs that was, especially like, you know, he was going to go good for the girl. We knew he was going to go good for the girl.
Arguably, Ryan, isn't that just good story writing then? If we're able to take hints from earlier portions of the story to be able to kind of construct what we expect the story path to go towards.
Correct. I just wouldn't go as far as to say that like I was surprised by the arc or my expectations were subverted.
Oh, okay, fair.
Next reason why this wasn't better: the lack of comedy.
Yeah,
This may not actually be a reason why it wasn't better, but I think it's a very interesting discussion.
And the forced attempts of it.
Yes, this is going to sound strange. I feel like this is something that should work in the film's favor, and I think it does. Anton, you like the gargoyles. Why?
So I'll make my case for the gargoyles. Now, one, this is supposed to be a kid's film, right? And if we kind of look at the gargoyles as a bit of a representation of just Quasimodo's innocence, part of what kind of even can then cast it in an even more tragic sense is if these gargoyles are really only in his head, we don't see them interact really with anyone else. And considering that, and if they're really there to kind of help take away from the harsh nature of reality around him, we get more of that as the film goes on. It just, I think, kind of helps emphasize that this is a kid's film and that there is escapism for these innocent people. And I feel like that just kind of, when you start to see that dichotomy, like I can appreciate the gargoyles for what they are, just kind of bringing a bit more lightness to the film that's for kids. And I don't think that they were necessarily absolutely annoying. I don't think they took away too much from the film at all. I think the film had its halves of a bit more light, a bit more the hunchback in like his sanctuary, and then kind of finally seeing the world. And that's when we get less and less of the gargoyles.
I know what you're saying. I know why they are put in the film. I do find them pretty silly.
It was like, it was a necessary evil.
Yeah. Oh, they don't. It doesn't in any way ruin the film for me. And I think the listeners can probably figure out at this point. We like this film quite a bit.
I love this film, but Jason Alexander like really ground my gears. I think back then and now.
I mean, it was the biggest, like Seinfeld was the biggest show on TV. They were very, very happy to have Jason Alexander on the show.
It made so much sense, especially following Robin Williams' performance in Aladdin.
But Jason Alexander is not quite the same as Robin Williams.
Not even close. There's no one like Robin Williams. That's no insult to Jason Alexander. We're talking about a one of one. There is nobody like Robin Williams, and there never will be.
Look, I just want the gargoyles. I just want the gargoyles, but one is Seinfeld, one is Costanza, and then they're just having the dialogue around adjacent to refuse is refuse.
I did find it kind of funny how, you know, when they're not interacting with Quasimodo, they just like turn back into, well, I mean, they're made of stone, but they turn back to stone. It's like, wouldn't someone wonder about them being gargoyles, just being in random locations scattered throughout the, like, how do these gargoyles still keep getting you?
He keeps moving. It's like Wilfred. He keeps moving them around. It's all in Quasimodo's mind. And actually, so I have a note here somewhere that several of the people on the production commented on the potential insanity of Quasimodo, and it was confirmed by 3 people that it was in fact.
Is that a detective's notepad?
Yes. Yeah. You know, some are here, some are there. I'm just investigating.
All right. I like it. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
Unfortunately, I took written notes, so I can't find the 2 names. But two of the producers did comment on this subject, and you know whether or not he was insane or it was like a little bit of. Amanda, my wife, put this very well. Is it insanity or is it Disney magic that only he can see? And the production commented on it and said it's actually Quasimodo's delusions. It's all a figment of his imagination. He's moving the gargoyles around, and that's why they. Well, there's the one thing with the goat where they try to suggest otherwise. I think one of them spits his tongue at the goat, but even with that considered, they still commented that it was all on his head. So I guess the goat was insane too.
Well, there's the thing with the goat, and then also they're playing an active role in the defense of the cathedral at the end. They're dropping stones and shooting
Still from
bullets
Quasi's
out of their
perspective,
mouths.
though. Oh, the bullets. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So they break their own notion on it then. You know, if that's what we're saying now. They established that that's what they intend. That was the intent, and I guess that is writing inconsistencies. That battle scene is, it brings up a lot of questions.
Like I said, they don't ruin the film for me, but I thought it was a attempt at humor that did not quite land. It added very little to the story for me.
And it was all scenes that were heavily shown in the trailers leading up to the theatrical release. It was like one of those things where you already saw 80% of the comedic relief before you even got into the theater.
Yeah.
But to your point, Anton, I get why they did it. This is a G-rated Disney film. They were always going to put something like this in the film. It was better than the cutesy animals in Pocahontas, which we'll get to on a later episode.
Yeah, right. Even right before this, if we go to, like you said, Pocahontas, before that, The Lion King, there's always been attempts at having like a bit of comedy with like a very famous, with very famous people, and to kind of also draw in attention for people to go to the film just because of like famous comedians in these roles. I'm thinking also like Whoopi Goldberg in The Lion King. Of course, the very famous one we mentioned earlier, Robin Williams as the genie in Aladdin. But,
Eddie Murphy in Mulan.
Yeah, which was...
Oh my God, yeah.
Again, Disney does this.
Yeah.
So.
Rosie O'Donnell and Tarzan.
Oh God, that was Turk. Turk was my least favorite part of that movie.
It was everyone's least favorite part of that movie. This is something I sort of mentioned earlier, comparing the first half of the Disney Renaissance to the back half. If you know your Disney history, which I think both of you do, in the first half of the Renaissance, they were really desperate for a hit.
Mm-hmm.
The 1980s was a pretty dismal decade for Disney. They were close to bankruptcy, believe it or not, around 1985. All of that changed in 1989 with The Little Mermaid, right? All of a sudden...
I mean, arguably it all changed with 1988's Oliver and Company, but...
It's still an honorable mention.
The movie stinks. He's being sarcastic.
My wife loves it.
It's a bad movie. I'll die on that hill. But no, The Little Mermaid is really what changed things, right? Starting with that, all of these films became major successes. Beauty and the Beast even got nominated for Best Picture, which was the first for an animated film. The Lion King, I didn't realize this until doing the research for this film. The Lion King was the second highest grossing movie ever at the time of release in 1994. Not animated movies, Ryan, ever.
Do you know they did an Easter egg of The Lion King and Hunchback?
I didn't.
They did.
Oh, I brought something new to the table because my homework paid off. So in the opening sequence, the first song, like the bells or whatever it's called, there's this establishing shot of like a town square. And there's several references in the same shot. There's like Belle from Beauty and the Beast walking down the street. There's like the carpet from Aladdin being hung over someone's arm. But the one I found the most exciting was there's two guys walking down the street carrying Pumbaa like on a spit, or maybe he's hogtied. The shot I saw was like not great, but like they're walking a pig for the roast, down the street, and it's Pumbaa.
Oh, that's poor Pumbaa.
Yeah, poor Pumbaa.
Yeah.
Rip.
This sounds like typical Disney Easter eggs.
Yeah, which is something we love about these films, right? They always do this with their
films. I never noticed that before.
No, I had never done that either. I know that stuff like this exists in pretty much every Disney film.
I saw Belle and it made me like freeze the frame, and then I kind of like I spied for like 30 seconds, and I'm like, wait a second.
Well, very appropriate. I mean, that was in France. Back to my point though about The Lion King, right, and just the Disney Renaissance. All of a sudden, the studio was sitting on a gold mine. They kept trying to replicate the success of that. That's why they bring in a guy like Jason Alexander, right? Let's recreate the Robin Williams thing. It's almost like they went from low expectations to high expectations. Like Beauty and the Beast, the next movie had to be Oscar worthy, right? Broadway ready. Like, one of the things that they set out to do with Pocahontas is Katzenberg wanted... He's like, well, we got a Best Picture nomination for Beauty and the Beast. we need to make another film that's going to be nominated for Best Picture. It's like, you didn't have that same motivation when you made Beauty and the Beast. You were just trying to make a good story, right? It's like, now you have different goals that you're trying to hit. Maybe they couldn't replicate the success, right? Like, maybe it was impossible to continue that. And obviously, they had a down era after this in what's known as the post-Renaissance, right? So maybe the expectations were too high. But I think that's why you're seeing a dip in quality with the second half of the Renaissance versus the first half.
Now, that's definitely a big part of it. And I think like financial motivations are a big highlight that was very top of mind during like the Eisner era. Now, Michael Eisner, of course, among the, Disney chairmen, very well known for cost cutting measures, very well known for kind of how to drive the most profitable Disney, company that he can. Of course, he didn't, shy away from investing in animation because that really did drive a lot of, profits for the company. But it's actually under Eisner that we start to see cost cutting measures, like instead of direct to theater sequels, starting to see more VHS directed home video productions, and we start to see a lot lower quality with those
Return of Jafar.
Exactly, which lines up with the same timeline of the post Renaissance, which is exactly where the Hunchback lines up with.
When was he fired? Like 05, 06?
Yeah, it was.
He was fired? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Michael Eisner. Oh yeah, yep. The board fired him.
What was like the felling blow? Like what was his last mistake?
It wasn't one thing necessarily. It was a combination of, number one, after Tarzan, the studio, the animation division, of course, entered a period what's known as the post-Renaissance, which is a lot of financial disappointments. Mm-hmm. Stuff like Atlantis, The Lost
Kathleen
Empire.
Kennedy, basically.
No, I'll let me articulate. A lot of the films just started to not make as much money. Like Atlantis, The Lost Empire, Treasure Planet. These were very expensive movies that were just not doing well at the box office.
The quarterly reviews just tanked.
Eisner made a lot of enemies. He was very much a dictator, and that may work for a long time when you're making all the money and your films are all box office successes. But when things take a turn and you're not meeting your quarterly profits with your films, it's harder to get away with that kind of a leadership style. Now, again, I am far from an expert on this. At one point, Anton, I would love to have some kind of a Disney historian on to go more, because I only know the surface level stuff. But he made a lot of enemies.
Yeah, and then it's interesting because, of course, then it moves into the Bob Iger era, which we went back to the Bob Iger era.
Yeah, well, he took a little break.
Yeah, just a little,
which has been enormously successful. But it's also, you could argue Disney's going through a little bit of a down period right now.
And you could argue,
oh my God, how much money have they thrown at these Disney Plus shows that they're not realizing back?
Quite a lot.
Part of it is, you could argue, Iger and this current leadership at Disney is making a lot of the same cost cutting measures and formulaic decisions that they did during the Eisner era. How do we make things that are direct to streaming versus in theater? How do we make sure that we look at different cost cutting measures to drive up profitability, and kind of looking at those same formulaic templates to either create movies, series, or even just watered down versions of what make people excited, hence the hollowed
out tauntaun that is Star Wars.
Exactly, or the live action Disney films, which haunt me to this day.
That's going to bring us into the next reason, the production. And this is something I didn't think about this much until really just before the recording. Anton and I were chatting before you joined, Ryan. So we mentioned the budget for this film is $100 million. That's in 1996 money, right? Very expensive.
Yeah, Honda Civic money.
Sure. Just for comparison, Ryan, what do you think the budget was for The Lion King, which came out 2 years before this?
Probably lower.
It's lower. How much lower?
30%.
More. So the budget for The Lion King was $45 million. So this cost more than twice as much. The budget for Beauty and the Beast was $25 million.
Was it because of like the on-site time they spent for concept, like all this Parisian research you were describing?
Perhaps, and I think you mentioned all the different locations that worked on this. I'm sure that added to the budget, but it's like
it seemed big staffed. It seemed all inclusive.
But it's like I'm thinking about this more, and it's like this should not have cost twice as much as The Lion King.
There was also new technology that they were using to animate, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a lot of money.
Which costs more at first whenever you're using a pioneering technology. And then, you invest in it, and then it makes some movies later cheap.
Yeah.
Like the way they invested in that stage tech for The Mandalorian with like that semicircle screen.
Now, considering all of the costs involved, I do think that this is a very beautiful film.
This movie looks amazing.
Still does.
You're completely agree. As an animated film goes, it's wonderful. It's one of their best efforts. By this point in the 1990s, we just alluded to all the software they were investing in. They were very much into combining traditional hand-drawn animation with assistance from computers. Some of the shots in this movie are absolutely breathtaking. My personal favorite shot is when, in the climax, when Quasimodo saves Esmeralda from burning at the stake, and he sort of what's the term?
He's web slinging.
He's basically web slinging back up into the cathedral. There's this awesome sweeping panning shot where you see the torches burning and the crowd below, and he's yelling "Sanctuary." Mm-hmm. It's spectacular. It really is like you can see how they spent the money, and it was not spent unwisely. It really does look amazing.
And you know what's interesting about the lava pouring from the gargoyle's mouth? I don't know, right down to the gargoyle's mouth, but that was actually molten lead was a defense system that Notre Dame was equipped with.
That's pretty cool.
So they didn't dramatize that molten lava was pouring from the cathedral. Like that was a wartime measure.
So fun, just that along with just considering all of the little details. It's why I feel like even for me thinking about this film, just how fantastic it is that attention to detail.
It's a timepiece, and therefore it is timeless.
The scope of the cathedral is what impresses me the most. It really does look huge, and I mean I've never seen the cathedral in person.
And they had to make it look like it did back then.
Yeah.
Like there's been many renditions of Notre Dame because of fires. Like Paris was constantly on fire, but they got to use the still existing architecture, and they had to work off of historian accountings of what it looked like before this fire. We're talking about 1482, right? I think that's when it's placed.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when Quasimodo is swinging between the parapets, like you really do get the sense that he's in his own world, and it really captures how it really perfectly captures the narrative that he's never left this setting.
Mm-hmm.
And you really get the sense of that. Disney animators, there's always been this dark side to their creativity, right? And we talked about thematically how this is a very dark film. But I think one of the reasons this works so well is you have this dark gothic setting, and yet the use of color is perfect. We have a dark palette in the backgrounds, right? There's a lot of scenes set at night, but you get all these bursts of color, right? There's turquoise and magenta and red and purple, and it that's what works for me the best, on top of everything else, which we haven't even gotten to the music yet, but the color of this movie is so impressive to me.
It's like what they sold in the original statement when they told them to drop that Hunchback Whale, or the Humpback Whale project.
Yeah, exactly. Perfectly said.
Almost perfectly.
I think you did fine.
I think you did great, Ryan.
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, thanks.
It's good.
So I have something interesting. I don't know if we're quite into like the alternate casting section of the podcast yet, but please let me know when that is, because there were a lot of interesting choices.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So you want to know who they wanted? I don't know if he was first, but you want to know who they wanted before Jason Alexander for the role of Hugo the Gargoyle?
It was
Nathan Lane was asked.
Nathan Lane.
Yeah.
Who had just been there. He was Timon in The Lion King, but he had to turn it down because of scheduling conflicts with Broadway shows.
He's obviously a better voice actor than Jason Alexander, but it's like, does that step on his performance in The Lion King?
No, and we would have just, it would have been more Timon. But it's interesting who they considered first. You mentioned Anthony Hopkins earlier for Frollo, but I think more interestingly, two renowned actors that were asked to voice cast this before him were Sir Ian McKellen and I think Patrick Stewart's knighted. Is he Sir Patrick Stewart? But both of them were asked for the role. Now, a quick question for both you guys. Between Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, who would you rather voice the role of Frollo?
Patrick Stewart.
Same.
Between the two, Patrick Stewart, but who I think ultimately did an amazing job, and I couldn't imagine anyone else would be Tony Jay.
Oh, I agree. Yeah,
1,000%. Yeah, no, yes, we got the performance it deserved.
Look, the man wanted immortality. He got it. I think it was either this role or he also played the role of Megabyte in Reboot. I think those for me are the staying power of Tony Jay.
Who could forget Reboot?
This Jewish man found his immortality and, the fiery vengeance of Catholicism somehow.
He did. Yeah, it worked out well for everybody.
It worked out.
It's just so ironic.
He is a real, or he's not longer with us, but when he was alive, he was a real voice actor, whereas Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart are not.
No, they had more theater experience.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. There's a different type of acting toolbox needed to be a voice actor versus like a stage or film actor, and not always does it translate well to have like a famous person attempt just to do voice acting. But I think for the most part, all of these performances in this film just were fantastic, including Demi Moore, who is not a traditional voice actress.
Do you guys know who voiced Achilles the horse?
Was it Frank Welker?
The same voice actor who voiced Porky Pig.
Did not see that coming.
Did not see that coming.
Right? It's like the Goku and Rolf thing. You just can't imagine one person doing both those roles.
Any other casting what ifs?
No, those are the ones I was most excited about. And I found the guys who commented on Quasimodo's insanity. It was Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise.
The directors.
Oh, the directors.
I didn't know which two said it, so I wanted to make sure I put the right quote.
Well, I understand your point though, because Disney films are weird. And not just Disney films, animated films in general. We don't usually talk about the directors as much as live action.
The involvement is more segregated. It's not like you're on a set with someone, managing their outward appearance and reactions. It's like you're with the animation, and then you're with voice actors, and it's all spread out.
Think about it. Like for all the wonderful Pixar movies that we like, can you name any of the directors for any of them other than someone like Brad Bird or Pete Docter? It's like probably not.
It's hard. There's not as much.
They're not the ones that live on.
And we'll try to do that on this podcast anytime. We're going to try to give them their accolades. All right. It's time to talk about the music. Is this Alan Menken's best score?
All right. What was his other one that he did something recent for Disney right before that?
A lot, man. He is a multiple Academy Award winner. He has won Oscars he won 2 Oscars for The Little Mermaid. He won another 2 for Beauty and the Beast. I think he won another 2 for Aladdin.
Dude, he's their Tom Brady.
Yeah, he has won, I think, a 7th Oscar for Pocahontas. I mean, is this his best score though?
I would say one of his most lasting.
Yeah,
it's something I would go back. And I'm not a rope dropper or a park closer. It's a term for people that are really about the Walt Disney parks. Like they're there when the rope drops at like 8 a.m. or whatever, the heck. But yeah, they are really upset.
I sold him short. He is an 8-time Academy Award winner.
We know the man's an MVP winner, or just in terms of consistently just putting out just award-winning scores in music. To me, this is
John Williams' credibility.
This is unanimous MVP worthy.
For what it's worth, he considers The Bells of Notre Dame his favorite song that he's ever worked on.
He does, and I think it's my favorite he ever worked on.
It's pretty awesome. I don't know if this is his best work, but I think it is the best thing about the film by far.
And it's the best in the eyes of the artist. He uses it as his own best work.
To me, this I think is some of his best work. I think this is definitely his most underrated work. I even remember before we started diving into the rewatches, Pat, I mentioned, hey, like, you're gonna watch this film, you're gonna listen to this music, and you're gonna be impressed, and it definitely delivers.
I don't listen to The Little Mermaid, but if I was cleaning my house, I could put this soundtrack on, and enjoy it and really enjoy it.
Yeah. There's a bunch of good songs too. Not just good, but great. I mean, Bells of Notre Dame.
I would say
epic. Out There is a beautiful song. Hellfire, that's the darkest song in a Disney film ever, right?
It was almost cut. They barely stuck the landing for, within the scope of what Disney would allow. And they even, like, the ghost of Esmeralda coming. So it's like the closest it came to being cut was because they had, like, the fiery image of Esmeralda, coming out at Frollo. And Disney was like, you need to make it even more obvious that wisp of flame is fully clothed. Like, we can't have any. It had to be distinguishable. So twice in that movie, they made that point in, like, two different scenarios in that one movie. It was about the amount of her clothing.
I'm amazed this did not receive a song nomination at the Academy Awards. That's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
Out There should have. That's what they led with, and that's how they sold the movie was that performance.
The only song I didn't like is the one the Gargoyles sing. No coincidence. A Guy Like You.
This is the weakest song of the film, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like there's a weak
and
link
it was
in all of these, but
they drop it, like, right after Hellfire, and then they, like, it's like that Hellfire is its own thing. So you're down low and you're scared, and then they come into that clown song, and you got, like, Quasimodo's hopes up and everything, and right after that's when you find out that the captain of the football team is gonna get the girl, but Disney wanted us to learn that at a young age.
I was trying to think of reasons, like, why is this just not remembered as fondly as some of the other films from that era? And it's like, none of the songs on this soundtrack were radio hits. Now, obviously, that has nothing to do with their quality, but if you think about Beauty and the Beast, big hit, the title song.
They radioed that?
Oh, yeah. A Whole New World from Aladdin was a #1 hit. Elton John stuff from The Lion King, those were all huge hits. None of these were. And like I said, that doesn't have anything to do with the quality of these songs. I think the songs here are wonderful, but I think that explains, at least partially, this film's legacy. The soundtrack in general, right? This went platinum in the United States. It sold 1 million copies, but it failed to match the success of its predecessors. Like, for some context, Aladdin and Pocahontas, they sold 3 times as many copies as this one. The Lion King sold 10 times as many.
Goodness.
Yeah.
I feel like that the soundtrack serves as a nice source of gravity for some of the more cartoonish things that are going on, though. Like, you complain about this or criticize that, but then the soundtrack is the thing that always pulls you back into, like, being like, well, this overall is a positive thing.
Last but not least, this movie has perfect pacing, just about. I didn't like the Gargoyles, but that's more of a writing thing than the actual pacing. This is right about 90 minutes. It's the right length for this kind of film. There was certainly no scene that I felt was too slow or dragged down the film. There's no filler. There's no fat. It is just such a well-told, well-paced story. Like with a lot of these Disney films, right? One of the reasons why I think a lot of these Disney films hold up is none of them are too long.
And that's the biggest problem nowadays.
So many films are too long.
Well,
there's still, to be fair, there's a lot of problems in films nowadays, which reflect the problems with films that we've talked about for years, but at least not for this one.
They're like, oh, well, they'll watch a Netflix show for 10 hours, so they'll sit in a movie theater for over 3 hours.
That may be it. I mean, look, Anton, we talk about this a lot. It's just like, why was Avatar: The Way of Water 3 hours? Like, why?
Oh, God.
And even something like, look, I haven't seen it, so I will not pass judgment on it, but I just had a question. That new Mad Max movie, okay, it hasn't done well at the box office. I heard it's good.
I would love to be on that one.
We need.
I haven't seen it yet.
On that one. Yeah.
All I'm saying is that when I was looking up information on it, I saw it's 140 minutes. Like, why?
I saw it in
Is it
theaters.
good?
Everything but Chris Hemsworth. Unpopular opinion.
But it was like, it felt like a Mad Max film. It felt like George Miller style.
Everything outside of Chris Hemsworth scenes, like 100%. Yeah, I was Mad Maxing.
That one's going to be an interesting case study, but
We're gonna cover it, Anton, because it is a box office bomb.
yeah.
Ooh, yeah. Please invite me on for that one, because it's mixed emotions, but like I won't say too much right now.
Say less, gentlemen. Anything to add
Say less.
before we wrap this up?
Something I found interesting in all this, I mean, it was a thought I had never had provoked before, but so much of this movie, so much of the plot device in this film is Frollo's lust, that it leads, it leads you into the thought of like the seven deadly sins, and what different villains were the most guilty of. I feel like most of them are pretty obvious, but I was just curious, we're talking about things like wrath and envy and greed. What did you guys think about other films? Since we're in a general Disney discussion and we're discussing other films, like, how would you ascribe the seven deadly sins to examples of other Disney villains, since we've been talking about such a highly esteemed one?
Man, on the spot, I'm trying to think.
My favorite, I'll just put one out. So, like, if we're talking about greed, I think a really good deep cut is Prince John from Robin Hood. Like, he embodied it perfectly. So, like, Wrath is a fun one. So, like, I say Wrath and Disney. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Is it Hades?
That's a good one. Yeah, no, there's several. An interesting one also is Clayton. If you think about how bloodthirsty that guy was, you could say his sin was wrath. Gaston from Beauty and the Beast is clearly pride. He has a whole musical number just about that. One I think is interesting for interpretation is gluttony. So who's the most gluttonous Disney villain? I feel like there's a more right answer, but what do you guys think on that?
It's hard.
I have no idea.
It is hard to think. Just who represents gluttony among Disney villains?
Cruella de Vil. It's not just food. It's not just about being, it's not just about the buffets. It's about, excess in its core definition. I mean, she just wanted to be covered in puppies. Yeah. I don't know. Sloth was a weird one, though. All they really had for that was Lady Tremaine, which is Cinderella's godmother or stepmother or whatever.
I don't know. Who knows? Yeah,
well, I'm not going that far.
I haven't seen that movie in forever.
No, I won't. Scar got envy. That one felt.
Yeah, I mean, his is envy and greed, right? Because he wants. Yeah, it's both.
Yeah, he envied his brother. That was his sin. I don't know, just a little head scratcher that I came across when I was doing homework for this movie.
It's a good one. So are we ready to wrap this up and give our ratings?
Let us do it.
Oh, God.
Well,
I think
Ryan,
so.
As you're the guest, you have the chance to go first if you wish.
I feel like we're out to dinner and the waiter just asked, like what I wanted to order. Your entree will be, and I was the least prepared. But I mean, weighing the music against Jason Alexander and the lack of hitting the target audience, I don't know. I feel like I'd have to give it 2 scores. But even as a child and an adult, they would balance out differently. So I would say B-, B-. Like, child me would say D- for different reasons than adult me would say B-.
All right. Well, you can only give one.
Well, I did.
Oh. You really giving this a B-?
Yeah.
Wow.
I hated Jason Alexander.
Okay. Wow. All right.
Ooh, unpopular.
Than I thought.
Well, I'm coming out of the gate swinging, Patrick.
I respect it. Anton, would you like to go next, or do you want me to?
Yes. No, happy to go next. This film is quite underrated, and I think that when we really cut it down and look at its different elements, this is a very, not just Disney film, not just animated film. This is just a very complete film, and we get great pacing, great character development, amazing music. and overall performances that really put together a story that I think a child can definitely, see the on the surface elements and see it for what it is, and at the same time as an adult truly appreciate like the deeper thematic elements that maybe would have went over your head as a kid. And I feel like it's for that it never really got enough appreciation for the reasons that we went over. But it's despite that I feel like a film like this deserves more attention and really should be considered on that Mount Rushmore of great Disney films, because it is fantastic. And I feel like when I think of like a complete story and a complete film that touches on like adult themes that you don't really see like films, or at least animated children's films, touch on nowadays, it's very impressive. It's a very brave film in that sense. Disney has often, with its greatest films, surprised me, and I feel like this is one of those films that is able to really surprise the viewer in the best ways possible. And so I feel like I can't say it enough, but this is a fantastic film. I feel like it's definitely, again, underrated, and for me, this film is an A.
I put it on a cozy shelf right next to Tron Legacy, where like I love the soundtrack, but I have story issues.
Fair. Disney never made something like this before this, probably will never again. The Lion King is objectively probably the most traditionally animated film that they've ever released. I think it has a better score and better songs than this, but man, this is close. It really works as a musical. The music, the songs and the score, top notch from Alan Menken and Steven Schwartz. The animation is gorgeous and genuinely haunting at times. There's some really haunting imagery in here. The voice cast is great. They successfully honored Victor Hugo's novel while making some understandable changes. The story and the characters are very compelling. The only real weak link for me was the gargoyles. I think they're silly.
Yeah.
Doesn't ruin the film for me, but I get why it's in there. This really does deserve classic status. It's a shame that it doesn't quite have it. I think the hardcore Disney fans know how good this film is. I can understand why it doesn't have the same legacy as some of its contemporaries, but this is an excellent film. It's an underdog. It doesn't get as much love as it should, and it really is the definition of underrated. I think it is every bit as good as the films in the first half of the Renaissance, even if it doesn't quite have their legs. I rate this film an A-. I really, really like it. And Ryan, I'm glad that you wanted to do this one, because I had not seen this in such a long time that I remembered very little about it, and it was such a satisfying watch.
I've had so many thoughts provoked watching it this week after so long that I've had so many new takes on the movie this week. Like if you asked me to give you a grade last week before revisiting it and doing a little homework, I probably would have given it an A-. But I guess my low score comes from I'm incorporating the fact that it failed to be the children's movie it was trying to be. But I guess if you take away, like marketing goals or financial targets they were trying to hit, and we're talking about the way I feel about this movie, it's a B plus or A- probably. I would be more forgiving.
You can give it that,
excluding that.
But I get what you're saying. I do.
Yeah, no, we get it.
Yeah. I would rewatch it before so many other Disney movies. I mean, maybe slightly before Tarzan, honestly.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that.
I haven't put on Tarzan in
just like
over a decade.
Funny.
But I watched Hunchback last year.
Yeah, funny thing about both those films, you get one film you get basically web slinging, the other one you get like vine riding, and both, but two very cool forms of travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, they both had me climbing stuff and breaking my wrists as a small boy, as a lad.
Well, hopefully not too much.
Once in a while.
Well, that is it for the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
This has been a dream come true. I spend so much time, listening to you guys and getting through my daily life, which is great. Not to say it's not great, but you guys certainly make long car rides and long silent periods much better. And it was an absolute honor to be on here with you. I hope I didn't sound too confrontational at points. I just
no.
I really tried to come to the table prepared on this one. I put a good 3 or 4 hours in yesterday just to make sure I was ready to talk shop.
Ryan, it was an honor having you on the show. just know that we love it when guests come in with their like fully formed, strong opinions, and that's what you came in with, and that's what we want. Just to have great
Thanks, man.
discussion, and I'll definitely say it first. Like, can't wait to have you back on the show.
Oh, stop it! I'm blushing. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thanks, guys.
Well, that is it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? We are going to be back next week with, I think, Blade Trinity, Anton?
Yes. So,
Oh my God, yes.
Eyes wide open for that one, right?
Ugh.
Or at least get the CGI ones.
We've been texting about this a little bit.
Movie's a war crime. Not that I'm spoiling my opinion on it or anything, but anyway.
A minus.
I can assure you it will not have an A-. Anyway, yeah, that's it. We'll see everyone next week, and in the meantime, take care. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.